I've seen Nero Wolfe turn down cases for reasons that would baffle a saint. Too noisy, too trivial, too far from the brownstone on West 35th Street or once. Because the client's tie clashed with his mood. So when Miss Clara Henshaw walked in on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, trailing a scent of lavender so thick it could have knocked out a prize fighter, I figured we were in for a quick dismissal. I was wrong, and that's saying something, because if there's one thing I'm good at, it's reading the big man's moods through the way he grunts or glares at his beer glass. It was just past 4, and Wolfe was in his office, ensconced in the custom-built chair that could probably hold a small elephant without a creak. He was halfway through a buxom, obscure treatise on orchid hybridization, no doubt, and I was at my desk, pretending to balance the ledger while actually doodling a caricature of Fritz in an apron, wielding a ladle like a sword. The doorbell rang, and I sighed. Visitors at this hour rarely meant good news. Fritz, our chef and resident guardian of the brownstone's sanctity, answered it before I could get up, and soon enough I heard the click of heels on the hardwood heading my way. Miss Clara Henshaw was 40-ish, prim in a grey suit that looked like it had been ironed by a drill sergeant, with a face that might have been pretty if it wasn't so tight with worry. Her hat was a little askew, and that lavender perfume hit me like a freight train before she even opened her mouth. She carried a small handbag clutched like a lifeline, and her eyes darted everywhere but at me, taking in the shelves of books, the Globe, and the yellow chair reserved for clients. "Mr. Wolfe?" she asked, voice trembling just enough to make you notice. "No, ma'am," I said, standing. "I'm Archie Goodwin. Mr. Wolfe is in the office. May I have your name and business?" I kept it polite, but I was already mentally betting she'd be out the door in 10 minutes. Wolfe doesn't do nervous Nellies, and he sure as hell doesn't do overpowering perfume. "Clara Henshaw," she said, barely above a whisper. I need help. It's a matter of life and death. My brother Edward Henshaw, he's been threatened. Someone is trying to kill him, and I think they've already started." That got my attention. Threats are a dime a dozen, but the way her knuckles whitened on that handbag told me she wasn't spinning a yarn for dramatics. I gestured to the yellow chair. "Have a seat, Miss Henshaw. I'll see if Mr. Wolfe is available." I didn't, and that available depended on whether he could tolerate her scent long enough to hear her out. I stepped into the office, closing the door behind me. Wolfe didn't look up from his book. "Well," he growled, which is his version of asking for a full report in under 3 seconds. "Miss Clara Henshaw," I said, "says her brother Edward is under threat of death. Someone's after him, and she thinks they've made a start. She's jittery, but she looks like she's got the goods. Also, she's wearing enough lavender to fumigate a ballroom. Fair warning." He closed the book with a thud that could have signaled the end of the world. His eyes, half-lidded but sharp as ever, flicked up to me. "Phooey," he muttered, which covered the perfume problem and probably his general annoyance at being disturbed. "Bring her in, and open a window." I did as instructed, though opening a window in the office is like inviting a hurricane into a library. Wolfe's domain isn't built for fresh air, it's built for his comfort, his orchids, and his beer. But I cracked it an inch, ushered Miss Henshaw in, and watched as she perched on the edge of the yellow chair like it might bite her. Wolfe didn't speak at first. He just sat there, fingertips pressed together, studying her the way a chess master studies a board before making a move. I could tell the lavender was getting to him. His nostrils flared slightly, and his lips thinned. But he didn't flinch. Nero Wolfe doesn't flinch over trifles, even olfactory ones. Miss Henshaw, he said finally, his voice a low rumble that could soothe or skewer depending on his mood. State your case. Omit nothing, but be concise. She swallowed hard, glanced at me as if wondering whether I was taking notes. I wasn't. Not yet, and plunged in. My brother, Edward, owns a small imports business, spices, mostly. He's not wealthy, but he's done well enough. 2 weeks ago, he received a note at his office. It wasn't signed, but it said, "You've taken what isn't yours. Return it, or you'll regret it." He laughed it off at first, called it a prank, but then, last Thursday, someone broke into his warehouse. Nothing was stolen, as far as he knows, but things were moved, crates shifted, papers scattered, and yesterday he found another note tucked into his coat pocket. It said, "You've been warned. Next time, it's your life." Wolfe's eyes stayed on her, unblinking. "And you believe this threat is earnest?" "Yes," she said, her voice catching. Because Edward has a severe allergy to almonds. Deadly, even a trace. Last night, at dinner, he took a bite of dessert tart, homemade by someone. He trusted Dan went into shock. If I hadn't had his epinephrine pen handy, he'd be dead. The tart had almond extract in it. Someone knew. Mr. Wolfe. Someone tried to kill him. That hung in the air like a bad smell, worse than the lavender, even. I shot a look at Wolfe, but his face was as readable as a brick wall. He shifted slightly, which for him is the equivalent of jumping up and pacing. "Who prepared the tart?" he asked. "His cook, Mrs. Delaney. She's been with him for years. She swears she didn't know it was a new recipe, she says, and she didn't check the ingredients closely. But I don't believe her. Or maybe someone tampered with it. I don't know. That's why I'm here. Edward won't go to the police. He says it's bad for business. But I can't sit by and watch him die." Wolfe leaned back, eyes narrowing. "You assume deliberate intent. It could be negligence. Negligence doesn't write threatening notes." She shot back, a spark of fire breaking through her nerves. I liked her a little more for that. "Indeed," Wolfe said, almost to himself. He was silent for a good 30 seconds, which feels like an eternity when you're waiting on him. I knew he was weighing it, the brother's business, the allergy, the notes, the break-in, and, probably, the lavender. Finally, he spoke. "Miss Henshaw, I will consider your request. Return tomorrow at 11. Archie will contact you if I require further details before then. Leave your particulars with him." She blinked, startled, clearly expecting more of a fight or at least a flat no. But she nodded, stood, and let me escort her out. I got her address and phone number, watched her disappear into the drizzle, and went back to the office. Wolfe was staring at the window, which I hadn't closed yet. "Shut it," he barked, then added, "and ventilate the hall. That scent lingers." I grinned. "You're taking the case, aren't you?" Despite the perfume assault, he glared at me, which is as good as a yes. "A man's life is threatened in a manner both calculated and personal," he said. "And spices are involved. That interests me." Marginally, my foot. I knew he was hooked, even if he wouldn't admit it. I closed the window, thinking about almonds and threats, and how a little dessert could turn into a big mess. Whatever was coming, it was going to start right here in the brownstone. And I had a feeling Miss Henshaw's lavender was the least of our problems. I've always thought of the brownstone on West 35th Street as a fortress not just against the chaos of Manhattan, but against the kind of human drama that tends to follow clients through the front door. Nero Wolfe likes it that way. It's his castle, his greenhouse, his dining room, and his battleground, all rolled into one impregnable shell. So when Miss Clara Henshaw showed up again the next morning at 11 sharp, bringing with her not just that infernal lavender perfume, but a shadow of tension that clung tighter than her grey coat, I knew the sanctity of our little kingdom was about to take a hit. I'd spent the evening prior mulling over her story, Edward Henshaw, spice importer, threatened by notes, targeted by a near-fatal almond-laced tart. It was personal, no question, and Wolfe's marginal interest had me curious. He doesn't take cases for kicks or cash alone. There's always a hook, even if he buries it under a grunt or a glare. I hadn't pressed him after Clara left. He'd retreated to the greenhouse, with Theodore to fuss over his orchids, signaling the conversation was closed for the night. But come morning, as Fritz served breakfast and I sipped coffee strong enough to wake the dead, Wolfe had muttered, "Confirm Miss Henshaw's appointment and prepare for company." That was as close as he gets to admitting he's in. When the doorbell rang, I answered it myself. Clara looked much the same as yesterday, prim, nervous, clutching the handbag like it held state secrets. But there was a new edge in her eyes, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe, or determination. "Good morning, Mr. Goodwin," she said, her voice steadier than before. "May I see Mr. Wolfe?" "Right this way," I said, ushering her in. The lavender hit me again, though I braced for it this time. I caught Fritz's subtle grimace as he passed through the hall with a tray of coffee. If Wolfe was going to endure this scent twice in 2 days, he'd either solve the case in record time or ban her from the premises. My money was on the former. In the office, Wolfe sat enthroned as usual, a glass of beer untouched on the desk, a rare sign. He was distracted. His eyes flicked to Clara as she took the yellow chair, but he didn't speak. He never does right away. It's his way of sizing up the room, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. I leaned against my desk, notebook in hand, ready to jot down whatever crumbs he tossed my way. The air felt thicker than it should have, and not just because of the perfume. Something was brewing, and I didn't mean Fritz's coffee, Miss Henshaw, Wolfe said at last, his voice a low rumble. "You have returned. I presume there is more to report, or you would not be here." She nodded, fingers tightening on her handbag. "There is. Last night, after I left here, I went to Edward's house to check on him. He was rattled more than I've ever seen. He told me something he hadn't before. About a month ago, he had a falling out with a business associate, a man named Victor Lang. Lang accused Edward of cutting him out of a deal. Something about a shipload of saffron that went sour literally and figuratively. Edward swore he'd done nothing wrong, but Lang threatened him, said he'd regret crossing him. Edward didn't take it seriously then, but now, with the notes, the break-in, the chart, he's starting to wonder if Lang is behind it." Wolfe's fingertips pressed together, a sure sign his brain was churning. "Mr. Lang's occupation? He's an importer too," Clara said. "Spices, like Edward, though I think he dabbles in other goods. They've known each other for years, rivals, sometimes partners. But this saffron deal broke something between them. Edward won't say much more. He clams up when I push. But I'm sure there's a connection." "Speculation," Wolfe murmured, almost to himself. "Facts, Miss Henshaw. I require facts. Who else knows of your brother's allergy?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to me before settling back on Wolfe. "Not many. It's not something he broadcasts bad for business, he says, to seem vulnerable. Myself, of course, his cook, Mrs. Delaney, his doctor, naturally, and I think Victor Lang might know. They've dined together in the past, and Edward always makes a point of mentioning it when ordering. There could be others, but I'd have to ask him." Wolfe's lips twitched an almost smirk, which for him is a full-blown laugh. A man allergic to almonds in the spice trade, an irony not lost on fate, perhaps. He shifted slightly, eyes narrowing. "And this break-in at the warehouse, describe it further." "What was disturbed?" Clara frowned, thinking. "Edward said it was subtle, crates rearranged, as if someone was looking for something specific. Some paperwork on his desk was out of order, but nothing missing that he could tell. He didn't report it didn't want the attention, but it shook him." "Phooey," Wolfe said, a sound that could mean anything from disdain to deep thought. He fell silent again, staring past her at nothing in particular. I knew that look. He was filing away every detail, turning it over like a stone to see what crawled out underneath. The room stayed quiet, save for the faint tick of the clock on the wall. Clara shifted uncomfortably, waiting for him to speak. "Good luck with that." "Wolfe operates on his own timetable, finally," he said. "Miss Henshaw, I will undertake to investigate. The threat to your brother, my fee will be substantial, as the matter is intricate and distasteful. Archie will provide the terms. Additionally, I require a list of all individuals with access to Mr. Henshaw's home and warehouse, including this Victor Lang, Mrs. Delaney, and any others of note. You will deliver it by 6 this evening. Is that understood?" She nodded quickly, relief washing over her face. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Wolfe. I'll have it ready. Anything else?" "For now, no," he said, waving a hand as if dismissing the very air she occupied. "Archie, escort Miss Henshaw out and ventilate the hall." I bit back a grin at that last bit and showed her to the door. She thanked me again, promised the list, and stepped back into the grey Manhattan morning when I returned to the office. Wolfe was already reaching for his beer, though he didn't drink. His eyes were on the ceiling, a sign he was deep in whatever mental maze this case was building. Distasteful, huh? I said, settling at my desk. The case or the lavender? Both, he growled. But a threat so tailored to Almonds, of all things, suggests a mind both precise and petty. That interests me, more than marginally. Now, I raised an eyebrow. So we're in. What's the first move? You will await Miss Henshaw's list, he said, and prepare for visitors. This Victor Lang, the cook, others they will. Come here, Archie. The brownstone will be disturbed, and I do not relish it, but it is necessary. Begin compiling background on Edward Henshaw's business, discreetly. I want no ripples yet. I nodded, scribbling a note to myself. Visitors in the brownstone always mean trouble suspects. Liars, weepers, or worse. And Wolfe hates having his routine upended. Even if he's the one orchestrating it. I could feel the tension already, creeping into these walls, like a draft you can't quite pin down. Clara Henshaw had brought a storm with her, whether she knew it or not. And I had a hunch that list of names was going to open doors, some of them better left shut. As I headed to the phone to start digging on Edward Henshaw, I heard Wolfe mutter something about saffron and spite. The brownstone was no longer just a fortress. For now, it was a chessboard, and we hadn't even met the other players yet. I've been around Nero Wolfe long enough to know that a case doesn't really start until you've got a roster of players to watch people with grudges, secrets, or just the kind of shifty look that makes you wonder what they're hiding behind a handshake. By 6 that evening, when Clara Henshaw delivered her promised list of names tied to her brother Edward's life, I had a feeling we were about to meet a cast of characters who'd make a Broadway drama. Look tame. The brownstone was still quiet, for now, but the air felt charged, like the calm before a storm you can't quite see on the horizon. Clara had come through as instructed. Dropping off a neat typed page at the front door, Fritz took it, with a polite nod and a quick retreat from her lavender cloud. I brought the list to Wolfe in the office, where he was nursing his second beer of the hour and staring at a blank spot on the wall, which is his version of high-octane brainstorming. I laid the paper on his desk, next to the beer glass, and waited. He didn't touch it at first, just flicked his eyes down like it was a minor annoyance rather than the key to the case. Read it. He grunted finally, leaning back in his chair with the kind of resignation that suggested he'd rather be upstairs with his orchids than dealing with human messes. I picked it up and scanned the names, 5 in total, each with a brief description in Clara's precise handwriting. All right, I said, keeping my tone neutral, though I was itching to dig into this crew. First, Victor Lang, business rival, spice importer, had a falling out with Edward over a saffron deal gone bad. Clara says he's got a temper and might know about the almond allergy from past dinners. Next, Mrs. Marjorie Delaney, Edward's cook for 8 years. She made the tart that nearly killed him, claims it was an accident. Didn't check the ingredients. Clara's not sure she believes her. Wolfe's lips twitched slightly disdain. probably for negligence in a kitchen. I went on. Third, Thomas Greer, Edward's warehouse manager. Being with him 5 years. Overseas inventory and shipping. Was on duty the night of the break-in. Says he saw nothing unusual. But Clara thinks he's too cagey about it. Fourth, Lillian Voss, Edward's bookkeeper and sometimes secretary. Handles the accounts. Has access to all his business records. Clara notes she's been edgy lately, maybe hiding something financial. And last, Peter Henshaw, Edward's cousin. Lives nearby, pops in often, has borrowed money from Edward more than once. Clara calls him unreliable, whatever that means. I set the list back down and looked at Wolfe. His eyes were half closed, fingertips pressed together in that steeple he makes when he's turning things over. In that giant brain of his, a compact circle, he murmured, rival, servant, employee, confidant, kin, each with access, each with potential motive. Phooey, complexity without clarity. That's the spice trade for you, I said, unable to resist. Full of flavor, but hard to swallow. He glared at me, which is as good as a laugh from anyone else. Archie, your wit is as tiresome as ever. Begin with Victor Lang. His dispute is explicit, and spite in business often festers. Arrange a meeting here. Tomorrow if possible. Discreetly. I want no rumors of our involvement yet. Then contact Mrs. Delaney. Her error, if it is one, is central. The others can wait briefly, but gather what background you can tonight. Got it? I said, jotting a note. Lang and Delaney first. You want me to play nice or prod a little? Observe. He said sharply, do not provoke. I require impressions, not confrontations. Report every nuance. And ventilate the office before Mr. Lang arrives. I will not endure another olfactory assault. I grinned, nodded, and headed to my desk to start making calls. Victor Lang wasn't hard to track down. His import business had a listed number, and a secretary with a voice like a rusty hinge told me he'd be free at 11 the next morning. I kept it vague, said it was about a mutual acquaintance, and didn't mention Edward by name. Lang's tone, when he came on the line briefly to confirm, was clipped, like he had better things to do but couldn't resist a mystery. I pegged. Him as the type who'd strut into the brownstone like he owned it. We'd see how long that lasted under Wolfe's stare. Mrs. Delaney took a bit more finesse. She answered her own phone at Edward's house, sounding harried, and got cagey when I mentioned a private matter concerning her employer. I dropped just enough, saying I worked for a consultant looking into recent events, to get her to agree to come by it to tomorrow. Her voice had a tremor, though, which could have been guilt, fear, or just annoyance at being summoned. I'd find out soon enough. With those set, I spent the next couple of hours digging into public records and making a few discreet calls to contacts who owe me favors. Victor Lang had a reputation in the spice trade shop. Successful, but known for holding grudges. Word was he'd lost a bundle on that saffron deal and blamed Edward outright. Though details were murky, Mrs. Delaney had no record I could find. But a neighbor I reached mentioned she'd been withdrawn since the tart incident, avoiding chit-chat. Thomas Greer, the warehouse manager, had a minor rap sheet from a decade-back petty theft. Nothing recent. Lillian Voss, the bookkeeper, was a cipher. Her name barely popped up, which could mean she's clean or just good at staying under the radar. Peter Henshaw, the cousin, had a history of small loans and late payments. According to a guy I know at a local bank, unreliable might be putting it mildly. By the time I wrapped up, it was pushing 9, and Wolfe had already retired to the greenhouse for his evening orchid ritual. I typed up my notes, left them on his desk for morning, and headed to the kitchen for a glass of milk and whatever Fritz had left from dinner. The brownstone was quiet, save for the faint clink of dishes as Fritz tidied up. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just opened a box we might not close so easily. 5 suspects, 5 sets of motives: rivalry, negligence or malice, loyalty or betrayal, greed, and family baggage. It was a tidy little web. But I've learned the hard way that tidy doesn't mean simple. Not with Wolfe steering the ship. As I sipped my milk, I glanced at the list again, still on my desk through the open office door. Lang would be here in less than 12 hours, striding in with whatever chip he carried on his shoulder. Delaney would follow, probably wringing her hands over that tart. And the others: Greer, Voss, Peter. They'd get their turn soon enough. The brownstone's walls seemed to loom a little closer tonight, as if bracing for the parade of lies, excuses, and half-truths about to walk through the door. I finished my glass, rinsed it, and told myself I'd better get some sleep. Tomorrow, the circle of suspects would start taking shape in the flesh, and I had a hunch Wolfe was already 3 moves ahead, even if he hadn't said a word. If there's one thing I've learned working for Nero Wolfe, it's that the real grunt work of a case happens outside the brownstone's walls, where I play errand boy, detective, and occasionally punching bag while Wolfe sits in his custom chair, sipping beer and letting his brain do the heavy lifting. By the time 11 o'clock rolled around the next morning, with Victor Lang due to arrive, I was primed to start peeling back the layers of this almond-laced mess. Wolfe had given me clear marching orders: observe, don't provoke, and I intended to follow them. More or less, after all, a little gentle prodding never hurt anyone, right? The doorbell rang precisely on the hour, which told me Lang was the punctual type, or at least wanted to seem that way. I answered it, and there he was, a man in his late 40s, trim in a tailored navy suit that screamed money, with a face like a hawk, all sharp angles and piercing grey eyes. He carried a leather briefcase, and his handshake was firm, almost aggressive, as if daring me to flinch. "Victor Lang," he said, voice clipped. "I assume you're Goodwin. What's this about?" "Step inside, Mr. Lang," I said, keeping my tone light. "Mr. Wolfe will explain. I'm just the usher." I led him to the office, catching a whiff of some expensive cologne that, thankfully, wasn't lavender. Wolfe was in position, of course, enthroned behind his desk with a fresh glass of beer, eyes half-lidded but missing nothing. Lang took the yellow chair without being asked, setting his briefcase beside him like a shield. "Mr. Lang," Wolfe began, his voice a low rumble, "I am investigating a matter concerning Edward Henshaw, You are acquainted with him, I understand. Lang's jaw tightened, just for a split second, before he smoothed it over with a thin smile. Acquainted, yes. We've done business in the spice trade for years. Rivals, sometimes partners. Why? What's this about? A threat to his safety, Wolfe said, blunt but measured. Details are unnecessary at present. I require information on your interactions with Mr. Henshaw, specifically regarding a recent disagreement over saffron. Lang's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of irritation. That's old news. A shipment went bad mold. Poor storage. Who knows? I took a loss. And I thought Henshaw played a part in steering the deal south. I confronted him. Yes, harsh. Words were exchanged. But it's business, not personal. I don't hold grudges. I raised an eyebrow from my spot at my desk, notebook in hand. That was a lie if I'd ever heard one. His tone had the bitter edge of someone who'd spent nights stewing over that loss. Wolfe didn't call him on it, though. He just pressed his fingertips together and stared at Lang, letting the silence stretch. It's a trick of his. Most people crack under that gaze. But Lang held firm, though I noticed his fingers tighten on the armrest. You dined with Mr. Henshaw in the past, Wolfe said finally. Were you aware of his allergy to almonds? Lang blinked, genuinely caught off guard for a moment. Almonds? Vaguely, yes. He mentioned it once or twice at restaurants, always fussing over the menu. Why? Has something happened? Wolfe ignored the question. Your dispute with Mr. Henshaw. Was it resolved? Not formally, Lang admitted, shifting slightly. We haven't spoken since. I've moved on. He should too. There was a challenge in that last bit. A jab meant to sting whoever was listening. I jotted it down, along with a note on his posture tense. Controlled, like a man used to winning. Wolfe dismissed him shortly after, saying only that he might be contacted again. Lang stood, grabbed his briefcase, and strode out with the air of someone who'd just dodged a bullet, but wasn't sure why. I escorted him to the door, watching him disappear down the street. Back in the office, Wolfe grunted, ambitious, defensive, possibly vengeful. What did you see, Archie? Same, I said. He's got a sore spot about that saffron deal, and he's not as over it as he claims. Didn't flinch at the allergy question, but he wasn't shocked either. He's in the game, whether he admits it or not. Wolfe nodded, almost imperceptibly, and waved me off to prepare for Mrs. Delaney at 2. I used the interim to grab a sandwich from Fritz Ham and Swiss. Perfection on rye and mull over Lang. He was a predator, no doubt. But was he a poisoner? Too early to say. Mrs. Marjorie Delaney showed up right on time. A stark contrast to Lang's slick confidence. She was in her 50s, stout, wearing a faded floral dress under a worn coat, with hands that looked like they'd spent decades kneading dough. Her face was lined, eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying or hadn't slept. And she fidgeted as I led her to the office. Wolfe gave her the same treatment, silence. Then the piercing stare, but she crumbled faster than a stale cookie. Mrs. Delaney, he said, voice softer than with Lang, but still firm. You prepared a dessert for Edward Henshaw that contained almond extract. Explain." Her hands twisted in her lap, and her voice came out small. I didn't mean to, sir. It was a new recipe, a fruit tart from a magazine. I didn't check the fine print, just saw extract and thought vanilla. I've cooked for Mr. Henshaw for years, always careful about almonds. I swear I didn't know. When he collapsed, I nearly died myself from the shock. I've been sick over it. Negligence is not a defense, Wolfe said, though there was no malice in it. Just fact. Who had access to your kitchen prior to the meal? She blinked, flustered. Well, anyone in the house, I suppose. Mr. Henshaw was in and out. His cousin Peter stopped by that morning, popped into the kitchen for a glass of water, I think. Miss Voss, the bookkeeper, was there earlier with some papers. I didn't think anything of it. Should I have? Wolfe didn't answer, just shifted gears. Your loyalty to Mr. Henshaw. Is it absolute? Of course, she said, voice rising. He's a good employer. Fair, kind even, in his way. I'd never hurt him. Never. But there was a quiver there, a crack I couldn't quite peg. Fear, maybe, or guilt beyond the tart. He let her go after a few more questions, mostly about kitchen routines, as I walked her out. I caught her wiping a tear. She was either a saint who'd made a terrible mistake or a very good actress. Back with Wolfe, I gave my take. She's shaken, no question. Could be innocent panic. Could be covering something. That bit about Peter and Voss in the kitchen worth noting. Indeed, Wolfe said. Eyes on the ceiling. Proceed with caution, Archie. Arrange to meet Thomas Greer at the warehouse tomorrow. Observe the scene of the break-in, then track down Miss Voss, discreetly. I want no alarms raised yet. I nodded, already mapping out my day. Legwork is my territory, and I was itching to get out there, poke around Edward's world. See what didn't add up. Lang was a shark, Delaney a bundle of nerves. Greer and Voss would add new angles. Maybe new lies. The brown stone felt like a cage after these interviews, and I was ready to stretch my legs, even if it meant wading deeper into this murky stew. As I headed to the phone to set up with Greer, I couldn't shake the image of that tart, innocent-looking but deadly. Someone had turned a dessert into a weapon, and I was betting the next clue wasn't far off. I've always figured that the brownstone on West 35th Street is as much a fortress as it is a home. Nero Wolfe's personal sanctuary, guarded by locks, routine, and Fritz's culinary vigilance. So when something, anything, goes awry within these walls, it's not just an inconvenience. It's a declaration of war. The morning after my interviews with Victor Lang and Mrs. Delaney, I was geared up to hit the road and poke around Edward Henshaw's warehouse with Thomas Greer. But before I could even grab my hat, a small disruption turned my plans sideways and got Wolfe's hackles up in a way I rarely see. It started innocently enough. I was in the kitchen around 8, polishing off a second helping of Fritz's blueberry pancakes worth their weight in gold. If you ask me when Fritz himself came in from the pantry, brow furrowed deeper than usual, he held a small glass jar in his hand. One of those airtight numbers he uses for his spice collection. And he was turning it over like it held the key to some unsolvable puzzle. "Archie," he said, his Swiss accent thicker with agitation, "this is wrong. Very wrong." I set down my fork, sensing trouble. "What's wrong? Pancakes are perfect. If that's your worry." He didn't smile, which is a bad sign. Fritz always smiles at food compliments. "No, it is this." He held up the jar, labeled cinnamon in his neat handwriting. It was not in its place. I keep everything precise alphabetical, always. This was on the wrong shelf, next to the nutmeg. And I think it has been opened. The seal. It feels loose. I raised an eyebrow, wiping my hands on a napkin. "You sure you didn't misplace it? Or maybe Wolfe was rummaging for a midnight snack." I knew that was a long shot. Wolfe doesn't rummage. He summons. "Impossible," Fritz snapped, almost offended. "Mr. Wolfe does not enter my pantry without request. And I do not misplace. Someone has touched this. I am certain. Now, a misplaced spice jar might not sound like the end of the world, but in this house, where order is practically a religion, it's a 5-alarm fire, especially with a case involving spices, threats, and a near-fatal dessert." I took the jar from Fritz, giving it a once-over. The seal did look tampered, with just a hair off, though I'm no expert. The faint scent of cinnamon wafted out, but I wasn't about to test it for poison. Not my department. "All right," I said, keeping my tone calm. "I'll show it to Wolfe. Stay put. And don't touch anything else in there until we figure this out." I carried the jar to the office, where Wolfe was already settled with the morning's mail and a glass of beer. He hadn't touched yet a sign he was mulling over yesterday's interviews. I set the jar on his desk, careful not to crowd his space, and gave him the rundown. Fritz's discovery, the wrong shelf, the loose seal. His eyes flicked to the jar, then to me, and for a moment, I saw something rare in his expression, genuine irritation, bordering on anger. "Phooey," he growled, leaning forward just enough to signal this wasn't trivial. "An intrusion in my own house. Unacceptable." He studied the jar without touching it, his gaze sharp enough to cut glass. "Tampered with, you say? By whom? And for what purpose?" "Beats me," I admitted. "Fritz swears it wasn't him or you. We had Lang and Delaney in here yesterday, but they didn't leave the office. I escorted them myself. Clara Henshaw's been by twice, but same deal. Unless someone snuck in overnight, which I doubt with the locks we've got. I'm stumped. Could be nothing. Could be a warning." Wolfe's lips thinned, a sure sign he was taking this personally. "Nothing is nothing, Archie. Not in this context. A spice jar, displaced and possibly compromised. While we investigate a threat tied to spices and malice, it is deliberate, a message or a probe. I dislike either." He leaned back, fingertips pressed together, and stared at the ceiling for a good 30 seconds. I waited, knowing better than to interrupt. Finally, he spoke. "Secure the jar in the safe. Inform Fritz to inspect every item in the pantry for similar disturbances. No one enters that area until I say otherwise. Then proceed to the warehouse as planned with Mr. Greer. But be alert. This trespass, however subtle, suggests proximity. Someone knows we are involved. I nodded, a little uneasy myself now. The brownstone isn't just Wolfe's castle. It's mine too, in a way. The idea of someone mucking around in our space, even if it's just a jar, felt like a slap. I stashed the cinnamon in the office safe per orders. Relayed the message to Fritz, who looked ready to stand guard with a Ladyland grabbed my hat. The warehouse was waiting, and so was Thomas Greer. But my mind was half on that jar. A warning, a taunt, or just a clumsy accident? I didn't buy the last one for a second. Edward Henshaw's warehouse was a squat brick building near the East River, smelling of dust, burlap, and something sharp I couldn't place, probably a mix of exotic spices clinging to the air. Thomas Greer met me at the front gate, a weary man in his 30s with a face like a ferret, all sharp features and darting eyes. He wore a stained work shirt and carried a clipboard, playing the busy manager. But his handshake was clammy, and he kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected trouble. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, voice gravelly. "Miss Henshaw said you'd be by. Something about security concerns. What's this about? Just a few questions," I said, casual as I could manage. "Walk me through the break-in from a couple weeks back. Show me where it happened." He hesitated, then nodded, leading me inside past stacks of crates labeled with names like cardamom, Sri Lanka, and turmeric, India. The place was a maze, dimly lit, with enough hiding spots to make a cat burglar drool. Greer pointed to a corner near the back office, where a few crates looked slightly askew even now. "This is it," he said. "Nothing big was taken, far as we know. Just moved stuff around. Those crates were shifted. Some papers on the desk riffled through. I was here till 9 that night. Didn't hear a thing. Found it like this next morning. I poked around, noting the dusty floor, no fresh prints. But that didn't mean much after 2 weeks. You lock up every night?" I asked. "Yeah, always. Double-checked it myself. Whoever got in knew what they were doing or had a key. I told Mr. Henshaw that, but he didn't want cops involved. Bad for business." His tone was flat, but those darting eyes told me he wasn't as blaze as he played. I pressed a little. "Anyone hanging around lately who shouldn't be? Disgruntled worker? Nosy rival?" Greer shrugged. "Too quick. Not that I've seen. We're a tight crew. Mr. Henshaw keeps things close. You have to ask him about rivals." I jotted that down, along with my impression Greer was hiding something, or at least nervous about saying too much. I spent another 20 minutes walking the perimeter, checking locks decent, not unbreakable, and eyeing the office desk tidy now. No clues. Greer stuck close, clipboard in hand like a shield, and I let him think I was satisfied. I wasn't. But Wolfe's orders were clear. "Observe. Don't rattle cages yet." As I headed back to the brownstone. The spice jar incident gnawed at me. A subtle trespass there, a subtle break-in here, too many coincidences for my taste. I'd report to Wolfe, track down Lillian Voss next, and see if her bookkeeping held any secrets. but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching our moves, maybe even laughing at us. The brownstone's walls were no longer just a fortress. They felt like a target, and that, more than anything, made me determined to pin down whoever thought they could play games in our house. There's a particular kind of tension that creeps into a case when the pieces start falling together, or at least start falling whether they fit or not. By the time I got back to the brownstone after my jaunt to Edward Henshaw's warehouse, the air inside felt heavier, as if that misplaced spice jar had opened a door to something uglier than cinnamon. Nero Wolfe was waiting in the office, of course, immobile as a mountain behind his desk, a fresh glass of beer at hand, and a scowl that could have curdled milk. I knew he'd been stewing over Fritz's discovery, and my report on Thomas Greer wasn't going to lighten his mood. But what came next, before I could even finish my notes, turned the heat up in a way none of us expected. I settled at my desk, flipping open my notebook to recap the warehouse visit. Greer's slippery, I started, keeping my tone even, showed me the break-in spot crates shifted, papers riffled. No obvious theft. He swears he locked up tight, didn't hear a thing. But his eyes were jumping like a jackrabbit's. He's holding something back, maybe about who's been sniffing. Around the place itself, locks are decent, not foolproof. Someone with a key or a knack could have slipped in. Wolfe's fingertips pressed together, eyes half-lidded but sharp. His demeanor suggests knowledge or fear. He murmured, possibly both. Continue with Miss Voss tomorrow. Financial irregularities may illuminate more than warehouse shadows. What of the jar still in the safe? I said. Fritz checked the pantry, nothing else out of place. Far as he can tell, he's got the area locked down tighter than Fort Knox now. No prints on the jar. Not that I'm a dactyloscopy expert. Still think it's a message. Undoubtedly, Wolfe growled. A subtle invasion meant to unsettle. It has succeeded. To my displeasure, we are observed, Archie. Closer than I prefer. I nodded, about to suggest a deeper sweep of the brownstone's security, when the phone on my desk jangled. I picked it up, half expecting Clara Henshaw with another nervous update. Instead, it was Saul Panzer, our go-to operative when things get dicey. Saul's voice was calm, as always, but there was an edge I didn't like. Archie, I'm at Henshaw's place on a tip you might want. Got a minute? Shoot, I said, glancing at Wolfe, who'd tilted his head slightly, his version of rapt attention. Been keeping an eye on the house since you mentioned the case, Saul said. Discreet, like always. About an hour ago, I spotted someone loitering across the street, a man, mid-40s, nondescript suit, washing the windows. Didn't approach, just stood there for 20 minutes, then walked off casual-like. Could be nothing, but my gut says surveillance. I tailed him a block. He caught a cab, and I lost him in traffic. Got a partial plate if you want it run. I scribbled the details, feeling my own gut tighten. Good catch, Saul. Anything else? Yeah. Henshaw himself left 10 minutes ago. Looked rattled. Drove off in a hurry. Don't know where. Thought you should know. Feels like the pressure's climbing. Thanks, Saul. Stay on it. I'll check with Wolfe and get back to you." I hung up, turning to the big man. Saul, sniffing around Henshaw's place, spotted a lurker. Watching the house, maybe tailing, lost him, but caught a partial plate. Also, Henshaw bolted out looking spooked, something stirring. Wolfe's lips thinned, a rare sign of genuine annoyance. Phooey, observation of our client. Simultaneous with intrusion here. Coordinated, perhaps, or opportunistic. Neither is tolerable. He leaned back, eyes on the ceiling for a long moment. Call Saul back. Retain him formally. I want eyes on Henshaw's residence and business continuously, discreet, but thorough. The plate trace it through your contacts. I dislike being outmaneuvered by shadows. I nodded, already reaching for the phone. Saul was worth his weight in gold for jobs like this, quiet, sharp, and relentless. I relayed Wolfe's orders, and Saul confirmed he'd stick to Henshaw like glue without being seen. Then I dialed a guy I know at the DMV, owed me a favor from a poker game a while back, gave him the partial plate, promised a bottle of bourbon for his trouble, and told him to rush it. He grumbled but agreed. With that set, I turned back to Wolfe. "Done and done," I said. "Saul's on watch, plates in the works. What's the play?" This lurker could be Lang, Greer, even the cousin Peter, or someone we haven't pegged yet. Speculation is useless, Wolfe snapped, though his tone was more frustrated than sharp. Facts, Archie. The lurker's identity, Henshaw's sudden flight, these will clarify intent. Until then, focus on Miss Voss. Her access to accounts may reveal a financial motive. A thread to pull. Arrange to meet her tomorrow. Neutral ground, if possible, and double-check our own locks tonight. I will not abide further trespass. I jotted that down, feeling the case's weight settle a little heavier. The spice jar stunt was bad enough, but now someone was watching Henshaw, maybe us too. And Edward skedaddling without a word to Clara or us didn't sit right. Was he? Running from something, or to something? I didn't like either option. The brownstone, usually my safe harbor, felt like it was under a microscope, and Wolfe's obvious irritation only amped up my own unease. I spent the next hour checking every door, and window locks solid, no sign of tampering beyond the pantry. Incident. Fritz was still on edge, hovering near the kitchen like a watchdog, and I told him to relax, though I knew he wouldn't. By evening, Saul called back with a quick update. Henshaw had returned home, still jumpy, no sign of the lurker. My DMV contact hadn't turned up the plate yet. Bureaucracy. What a shock. I reported both to Wolfe, who grunted and retreated to the greenhouse for his orchid ritual, signaling he was done for the night. As I sat at my desk, typing up the day's notes, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on us. That jar in the safe. The figure outside Henshaw's house. It was all too close, too personal. Someone was tightening the screws, and not just on Edward. I thought about Lillian Voss, the bookkeeper, scheduled for tomorrow. If money was the route here, her ledgers might crack something open. But I had a hunch the real pressure wasn't in numbers. It was in whoever thought they could rattle us on our own turf. I glanced at the safe, half tempted to check the jar again, then thought better of it. Wolfe's orders were clear. Focus forward. Voss tomorrow. Sol on watch. Plate pending. Still, as I headed upstairs to bed, I double-checked my door lock out of habit. The brownstone's sanctity was under siege, subtle as it was, and I wasn't about to let my guard down. Not with a case this sneaky, and not with Wolfe already bristling like a bear poked one too many times. Whoever was out there, watching or meddling, had just made this personal, and that, I figured, was their biggest mistake yet. There's a point in every case where Nero Wolfe shifts from observation to orchestration, where he starts laying traps with words and timing instead of gunpowder or fists. It's a subtle pivot, invisible to anyone who doesn't know him. But I've been around long enough to spot at a slight narrowing of the eyes, a deliberate pause before speaking, the way he presses his fingertips together just so. By the morning after Saul Panzer's report of a lurker outside Edward Henshaw's house, I could tell Wolfe was moving into position, ready to tighten the net around our circle of suspects. The brownstone, still smarting from that spice-jar trespass, was no longer just a sanctuary. It was his chessboard, and he was about to start moving the pieces. I was up early, sipping Fritz's coffee strong enough to wake a corpse, when Wolfe descended from the greenhouse post-orchid ritual, settling into his chair with a grunt that signaled both annoyance and resolve. My DMV contact had called late last night. The partial plate Saul snagged traced to a rental car, picked up 3 days prior by a John Smith, paid in cash. No further ID, the dead end, naturally. But I reported it anyway, along with Saul's. Latest update, Henshaw was staying put for now, still jittery. No sign of the watcher returning. Wolfe listened, eyes half-lidded, then muttered, "Phooey. Anonymity suggests intent, not accident. Our adversary is cautious, Archie, but not invisible. Proceed with Miss Voss today. Her financial records may betray a motive more tangible than spite or surveillance. Arrange the meeting for a public venue. Discretion remains paramount. Report every nuance." I nodded, already dialing Voss's number from the list Clara provided. Lillian Voss answered on the third ring, her voice crisp but guarded, like someone used to fending off questions. I kept it vague, said I represented a consultant reviewing Edward Henshaw's business security. Needed a quick chat. She hesitated, then agreed to meet at a quiet diner near her office at 11. Neutral ground, as Wolfe wanted. I barely hung up when he spoke again. Additionally, Wolfe said, his tone measured, "Contact Clara Henshaw. Inform her I require a private meeting with her brother tomorrow. Here, at 2 o'clock. No excuses." His evasion fleeing, without notice, suggests either fear or complicity. I will ascertain which. Make it clear this is not a request. Got it, I said, scribbling a note. You think Edward's in deeper than Clara's letting on? Speculation is futile. He snapped, though his glare softened a fraction. His behavior, combined with external observation, indicates a nexus of pressure. I intend to exploit it. One further matter, Victor Lang. Send him a brief message, typed, unsigned, delivered by courier. It will read, "Your disagreement with Henshaw is known. Clarity is advised. Nothing more. Observe the courier's return for any immediate reaction." I raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Wolfe's baiting tactics are old hat to me, subtle jabs to stir the pot without showing his hand. I typed the note on plain paper, sealed it, and called a trusted courier service to handle. Delivery to Lang's office by noon, a nudge like that could rattle Lang into a slip, or at least a telling response. Wolfe's positioning was in full swing now, drawing Edward in, poking Lang, and sending me to sniff out Voss. The spice jar incident still hung over us, a quiet threat. But Wolfe was turning that unease into leverage. By 10:45, I was at the diner, a no-frills joint on East 23rd with formica tables and a faint smell of grease. Lillian Voss was already there, tucked into a corner booth, nursing a coffee. She was late 30s, thin, with severe glasses and a grey suit that matched her pinched expression. Her fingers tapped the mug rhythmically, nerves, maybe, or impatience. I slid in across from her, flashing a disarming grin. "Miss Voss, thanks for meeting me. Archie Goodwin. I'm looking into some security matters for Edward Henshaw. Won't take long." Her eyes narrowed behind the glasses. Security? Clara mentioned something, but Edward didn't. "What's this about? Just tying up loose ends," I said, casual. "You handle his books, right? Any odd transactions lately? Big withdrawals, unexpected debts, anything that raised an eyebrow?" She stiffened, fingers pausing on the mug. "I don't discuss client details without permission. Edward's business is stable, far as I know. If there's a specific concern, he should raise it himself. Fair enough." But her defensiveness was a neon sign. I shifted gears. "Sure, I get that. What about visitors to the office or warehouse? Anyone poking around who shouldn't be? Rival firms? Maybe." Her gaze flicked away, just for a second. "Not that I've noticed. Victor Lang used to stop by months ago, before. They're falling out. Haven't seen him since. Warehouse isn't my territory." Asked Greer. "Look, I've got a meeting soon. Anything else?" I noted her dodge on finances, her quick mention of Lang. "One thing," I said. "Were you at Henshaw's house the day of the dessert incident?" "Heard it was a close call." She blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, briefly, dropping off invoices. I left before dinner. Awful what happened, but I don't know details. Mrs. Delaney was in a state about it later." She checked her watch, stood. "I really must go. Contact Edward if you need more." I let her leave, jotting impressions, guarded, evasive on money. Knew about the tart but distanced herself. Something there, maybe, if I could crack the shell. Back at the brownstone by 1, I found Wolfe still in the office, awaiting the courier's report on Lang. I gave him Voss's rundown, her reticence, the Lang mention, her presence at the house pre-tart. "Predictable," Wolfe murmured. "Financial custodians rarely volunteer vulnerability. Press Edward on her tomorrow." Her reticence. Maybe protective or predatory. The courier returned minutes later. A kid I'd used before. Reliable. Delivered it straight to Lang's desk. He said. Guy read it. Face went hard like he'd bitten a lemon. Crumpled it. Tossed it in the bin. Muttered something I couldn't catch. Didn't send a reply. Just went back to his papers. I relayed that to Wolfe after the kid left. His lips twitched, almost a smirk, irritation. Not panic. He is unsettled, but not unmoored. Good. Let him simmer. Clara's response on Edward. Called her just now, I said. She sounded flustered, but promised to get him here at 2 tomorrow. Said he's been dodging her too. Claims it's stress. I made it clear you weren't asking. Satisfactory, Wolfe said. Leaning back, tomorrow, Edward Henshaw. We'll face inquiry. Saul remains on watch tonight. Confirmed, I replied. Eyes on the house and warehouse. No new lurkers as of his last check-in. Wolfe nodded, eyes drifting to the ceiling, a sign he was plotting the next move. I could feel the case shifting underfoot, like a ship catching wind. Wolfe was baiting Lang, pulling Edward in, and using Voss's reticence as a lever to pry. At tomorrow's meeting, the spice jar incident lingered, a quiet thorn, but he wasn't dwelling on it now. He was building towards something. Increased pressure, sure, but controlled his way. As I typed up the day's notes, I couldn't help glancing at the safe where that jar sat. Whoever had meddled there, whoever watched Henshaw's house, might be feeling Wolfe's squeeze soon. Tomorrow's meeting with Edward could crack a window into this mess or slam it shut tighter. Either way, Wolfe was in position, and I was just the pawn waiting for his next order. The brownstone felt like a taut wire, humming with anticipation, and if I knew anything, it was that Wolfe played tension like a maestro. Whoever was out there better watch their step. There comes a moment in every Nero Wolfe case when the brownstone on West 35th Street transforms from a fortress into a courtroom or maybe a lion's den, depending on how you look at it. By 2:00 the day after my meeting with Lillian Voss, that moment had arrived. Wolfe had orchestrated a gathering of the key players in Edward Henshaw's tangled mess. And the office, usually a bastion of quiet order, was about to become a crucible of nerves, lies, and carefully calibrated pressure. I've seen Wolfe dismantle egos with nothing but words and a stare today. I had a front row seat to watch him do it again. The setup started early. Wolfe had instructed me to summon the entire circle: Edward Henshaw, Clara Henshaw, Victor Lang, Mrs. Marjorie Delaney, Thomas Greer, Lillian Voss, and Peter Henshaw, Edward's unreliable cousin. Most agreed with varying degrees of reluctance after I made it clear Nero Wolfe didn't issue invitations lightly. Lang grumbled about wasting time. Greer claimed a tight schedule. Voss sounded icy but compliant. Only Peter needed extra prodding. Clara tracked him down at a bar, and I had to lean on the phone pretty hard to get him to show. Saul Panzer was still on watch outside Edward's properties, ready to report any last-minute oddities. By 1:30, Fritz had arranged extra chairs in the office yellow for Edward, the center of this storm, and a mismatched set for the others. Wolfe sat enthroned as always, a glass of beer untouched on his desk, eyes half-lidded but missing. Nothing. They filtered in over the next 20 minutes. A parade of tension in tailored suits and nervous twitches. Edward Henshaw arrived first with Clara, looking pale and gaunt, mid-40s. In a rumpled grey suit, his eyes darting like he expected a trap, Clara hovered near him, lavender scent mercifully muted today, her face tight with worry. Victor Lang strutted in necks, hawkish and composed, briefcase in hand. Throwing Edward a glance sharp enough to cut glass, Mrs. Delaney shuffled behind, wringing her hands in that faded floral dress, avoiding everyone's gaze. Thomas Greer slunk in, ferret-faced and edgy, clipboard underarm as if it were a security blanket. Lillian Voss was all business, glasses glinting under the office light, her posture rigid. Peter Henshaw stumbled in last, reeking faintly of cheap booze, a lanky 30-something with a smirk that begged to be wiped off. I directed them to their seats, keeping my own spot at my desk, notebook ready. The room felt stuffed, not just with bodies, but with unspoken grudges and secrets. Wolfe let the silence build for a full minute after the last chair creaked, his gaze sweeping the group like a general surveying a battlefield. I could see Edward shift uncomfortably, Lang's jaw tighten, Delaney's hands tremble. Wolfe does that makes you feel naked without saying a word. Mr. Henshaw, Wolfe began at last, voice a low rumble aimed at Edward. You are the fulcrum of a threat to your life. I have assembled those proximate to that threat to clarify matters. You will speak first. Explain your recent flight from your home, as reported 2 days ago, without notice to your sister or myself. Omit nothing. Edward swallowed hard, hands gripping the armrests of the yellow chair. I got spooked, Mr. Wolfe, after the tart incident. The notes, the break-in, I've been on edge. That day, I thought I saw someone watching the house across the street, just standing there. I panicked, got in my car, drove to a friend's place upstate for a few hours to clear my head. I didn't tell Clara because I didn't want her worrying more. I'm sorry if it caused trouble. Clara's brow furrowed, but she stayed silent. Wolfe's eyes flicked to her, then back to Edward. Panic is plausible. Deception is not. Have you received further threats since the last note? Edward hesitated, then nodded faintly. Yesterday, another note slipped under my office door. At the warehouse, said, "Time's up. No more warnings." I burned it. Didn't want Clara to see. A murmur rippled through the room. Delaney gasped softly. Greer's eyes darted. Lang's face stayed stone. Wolfe pressed his fingertips together, unmoved, foolish, but noted. Now, Mr. Lang, your dispute with Mr. Henshaw over a saffron shipment. You claimed it impersonal, yet I detect rancor. Elaborate. Lang straightened, voice clipped. As I told your man Goodwin, it was business. A loss. Yes, significant. I confronted Edward. Accused him of undercutting me. He denied it. We parted ways. I've moved on. If he's in trouble, it's not my doing. His glare at Edward said otherwise, though old wounds, still raw. Wolfe shifted his gaze to Delaney. Mrs. Delaney, the tart laced with almond extract. Negligence, you claim. Yet others were in the kitchen that day. Name them again, precisely. Her voice quavered. Mr. Henshaw, of course. Miss Voss, with papers. Peter, for water or something he's always poking around. I was busy, didn't watch close. I swear, I didn't know about the extract. Peter scoffed, slouching. I didn't touch a thing. Just grabbed a glass, said High. Don't pin this on me, lady. Wolfe ignored the interruption, turning to Greer. Mr. Greer, the warehouse break-in. You reported no theft, yet items were disturbed, searching for something, perhaps. What was sought? Greer shrugged to quick. Couldn't say. Nothing valuable's missing. Crates moved. Papers shuffled. I lock up tight someone had a way. In, that's all I know. And you, Miss Voss, Wolfe said, voice unwavering. Financial oversight grants access. Have you observed irregularities, debts, payments, losses that might provoke enmity? Voss adjusted her glasses, cool as ice. I've seen nothing unusual. Edward's books are sound. If there's a concern, I'd need specifics to address it. Her tone deflected, just as it had with me. Wolfe leaned back slightly, a rare movement, letting silence settle again. I scribbled notes Edward's new note, Lang's barely veiled hostility, Delaney's jittery repetition, Greer's evasiveness, Voss's stonewalling, Peter's casual dismissal. The room buzzed with undercurrents, and I knew Wolfe was reading. Every twitch, every dodge. He wasn't unraveling yet. He was coiling, letting them feel the weight of his scrutiny. One final point, Wolfe said, addressing all. My own domain has been violated, a minor intrusion, yet deliberate, a warning, perhaps, tied to this affair. Whoever orchestrated it should know. I do not abide such affronts. Clarity will emerge, with or without cooperation. That hung in the air, heavy. Edward paled further. Lang's eyes narrowed. Delaney flinched. Wolfe waved a hand, dismissing them for now. You will remain available. Archie will escort you out. Mr. Henshaw, Miss Henshaw, linger a moment. I ushered the others out, catching muttered curses from Peter and a sharp look from Lang. Back in the office, Wolfe fixed Edward with a stare. Your fear is evident. If you withhold further, it jeopardizes you more than me. Reflect on that. Go. They left, Clara supporting Edward. I turned to Wolfe, stirred the pot good. Who's sweating most? Patience, Archie, he murmured, eyes on the ceiling. They are positioned. Reactions will betray. Saw reports, nothing new yet, I said. He's still on watch. Good. We wait. The net tightens. His tone promised a reckoning, and I knew the office gathering was just the prelude. Whoever thought they could play games here or with Henshaw was about to learn Wolfe doesn't lose at his own table. There's a peculiar kind of hush that falls over the brownstone when Nero Wolfe is about to crack a case wide open. It's not just quiet, it's charged, like the air before a thunderstorm, heavy with the weight of what's coming. After the office gathering the day prior, where Wolfe had stirred the pot with surgical precision, I knew we were close. The suspects had left rattled, their nerves exposed under his relentless gaze. And I'd spent the evening typing notes on every flinch and deflection. By the next morning, as I sat in the office with a fresh cup of Fritz's coffee, Wolfe was already in position behind his desk, a glass of beer at hand, eyes half-lidded but burning with that rare intensity that signals the endgame. He'd spent the night in thought up in the greenhouse longer than usual, according to Fritz, and hadn't spoken much at breakfast. beyond a grunt to confirm Saul Panzer's latest report. No new lurkers at Edward Henshaw's home or warehouse, just a tense comm. My DMV contact had nothing more on the rental car plate, still a dead end. But Wolfe didn't need external sparks today. He had enough tinder from yesterday's gathering to light a fire. At 10 sharp, he shifted slightly in his Chera minor. Move for most, a declaration for him, and spoke. Archie, he rumbled. Summon Clara and Edward Henshaw for 11 this morning. Inform them resolution is imminent. Then contact Victor Lang, Mrs. Delaney, Mr. Greer, Miss Voss, and Peter Henshaw. They will assemble here at 2 this afternoon. Make it unequivocal. Absence will be interpreted as evasion. I am prepared to conclude this distasteful affair. I raised an eyebrow, but didn't question it. When Wolfe says he's ready, he's ready. I made the calls, starting with Clara, who sounded relieved yet anxious, promising to bring Edward on time. The others' varied Lang was curt, Delaney tearful, Greer grudging, Voss detached, Peter surly, but all agreed, sensing the weight behind the summons. Saul was instructed to stand by near the brownstone in case of last-minute surprises. By 10:30, the stage was set, and I settled at my desk, notebook ready, wondering which thread Wolfe had pulled to unravel this knot. Clara and Edward arrived first. Just before 11, Edward looked worse than yesterday, paler, eyes sunken, suit even more rumpled, while Clara hovered. Her lavender muted, but her worry palpable. Wolfe didn't waste time on pleasantries. Mr. Henshaw, he said, voice low but piercing, your ordeal stems from a calculated malice. I have discerned its source. Sit. You will hear the prelude now, the full reckoning at 2. Edward nodded mutely, taking the yellow chair, Clara beside him. Wolfe leaned back, fingertips steepled, and began. The threat to your life via notes, a break-in, and a poisoned dessert is not random. It is personal, intimate, rooted in both business and betrayal. The almond extract in the tart was no accident. It exploited a known vulnerability. The question was motive and access. Clarity emerged from yesterday's assembly, though the seed was planted earlier. He paused, letting that sink in. I kept silent, scribbling, knowing this was his warm-up. Edward's hands tightened on the armrests. Who? Then, he rasped, who's doing this? Patience, Wolfe said. Consider the circle. Victor Lang, aggrieved by a business loss, harbors rancor, but lacks intimacy with your household. Mrs. Delaney, negligent perhaps, but her distress rings genuine, and her access is limited by routine. Thomas Greer, evasive about the break-in, suggests peripheral knowledge, not authorship. Peter Henshaw, opportunistic, lacks the precision for such a scheme. Lillian Voss, guarding financial secrets, deflects but does not strike as vengeful. Yet one factor binds the axe, knowledge of your allergy, paired with proximity to both home and warehouse. Edward frowned, Clara's eyes darting between them. Wolfe continued, the notes, the break-in diversions, meant to obscure. The true act was the tart, a murder attempt veiled as error. Who knew, beyond doubt, of Almonds' lethality to you? Who had access to Tampa, unnoticed? The answer crystallized in a reaction yesterday, a subtle recoil, masked but evident to me. He stopped there, leaving them hanging. Clara pressed. "Who? Mr. Wolfe, please." "At 2, he said. Immovable. "Return then, Archie. Escort them out." I did. Noting Edward's shaky steps and Clara's frustrated sigh, back in the office, I couldn't resist. "You've got it pinned." "Why the wait?" "Confirmation," Wolfe growled. "And impact. Reactions at 2 will seal it. Prepare the room. I require no interruptions." I nodded, spending the next hours ensuring Fritz had coffee ready and chairs arranged. By 1:50, the suspects trickled in, tension thicker than yesterday. Edward and Clara took their spots. Lang stood stiffly until seated. Delaney fidgeted. Greer avoided eye contact. Voss remained icy. Peter slouched with a smirk. Wolfe waited until precisely 2, silence his opening salvo, then spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice a thunderous calm. "A conspiracy to murder Edward Henshaw has unfolded, marked by notes, intrusion, and a dessert laced with deadly almond extract. I have identified the architect. The motive blends financial desperation and personal spite, masked by feigned allegiance. The act required knowledge of Mr. Henshaw's vulnerability and access to his kitchen. Only one here unites these with a presence on the day of the attempt, confirmed by Mrs. Delaney's account, and a telltale reaction to my probe yesterday of an intrusion here, in my domain." His gaze swept, lingering nowhere, yet all squirmed. "Clara Henshaw," he said suddenly, voice cutting. "You orchestrated this. Your brother's allergy, known intimately. Your presence at his home, unchallenged, on the day of the tart. As Mrs. Delaney noted, you could tamper with ingredients or recipe, unseen. Your motive, financial strain, hidden from Edward, hinted by Miss Voss's reticence on accounts you likely manipulated, and a sibling resentment, subtle but festering, betrayed in your overzealous concern masking control. Yesterday, when I mentioned my own intrusion, a spice jar displaced, you alone flinched. A guilt to personal, for you accessed this house, knew my habits from visits, and staged that warning to divert suspicion outward. Clara froze, face draining of color. Edward gasped. "No, Clara." "Preposterous," she snapped, but her voice trembled. "I've protected him. Protection as pretense," Wolfe said. "The notes, written in a hand you could disguise, delivered by your means. The break-in, arranged or feigned, to bolster fear. The tart, your almond extract substituted. Trusting Mrs. Delaney's negligence as cover. My jar, a misstep. Your scent, lavender, lingered faintly in memory, tying you to proximity. Deny if you will, but your reaction now confirms." Clara stood, shaking, then crumpled back, silent. Edward stared, broken. Lang's eyes narrowed. Voss looked away. Wolfe waved a hand. "Archie, summon Inspector Kramer. Miss Henshaw will answer to authority. The rest, depart. This affair is concluded. I made the call." Kramer grumbling but en route. The room emptied slowly. Edward escorted by Clara, now mute, under my watch until police arrived. "Back with Wolfe," I said, That flinch yesterday damn thin to hang it on. Thin, but decisive, he murmured, coupled with access, motive. Inferred from Voss's silence on accounts Clara likely skewed, and opportunity sufficient. Kramer will extract confession or evidence. I am satisfied. The brown stone settled. Tension easing as Kramer took Clara away. Wolfe reached for his beer. Case closed. I typed the final notes, marveling at how a sister's betrayal hid behind lavender and lies. The fortress stood firm again, but I'd never smell cinnamon quite the same. There's a certain rhythm to the brownstone on West 35th Street after a case closes, a quiet settling, like dust after a storm, where the fortress regains its sanctity, and Nero Wolfe retreats to his routines, leaving the chaos of human malice behind. In the hours following Clara Henshaw's unmasking, as the architect of her brother Edward's near murder, and her subsequent handover to Inspector Kramer, that rhythm slowly returned, but not without a few final notes to tie up the melody of this particularly bitter affair. I've seen Wolfe dissect motives and crimes with surgical precision before, but this one, with its familial betrayal and subtle intrusions into our own walls, left a lingering aftertaste even for me. By late afternoon, after Kramer had carted Clara off, still pale, silent, refusing to meet Edward's shattered gaze, the office felt unnaturally empty. Edward had lingered only long enough to mutter a broken thank you to Wolfe before shuffling out, a man hollowed by the realization that his protector had been his predator. I escorted him to the door, noting the slump in his shoulders, the way he clutched his coat like it could shield him from more than the Manhattan chill. Clara's motive, as Wolfe had laid out, was a toxic blend of financial desperation and buried resentment. She'd likely siphoned funds from Edward's business, hidden by her influence over Lillian Voss's records, and masked her intent with overzealous care that bordered on control. The almond-laced tart was her final gambit, a murder attempt cloaked in accident, with the notes and break-in as diversions, and that spice jar in our pantry a petty taunt, born of her familiarity from client visits, a misstep that betrayed her when Wolfe caught her flinch at its mention. Back in the office, Wolfe sat immobile, a fresh glass of beer finally touched, a sign he was unwinding. I settled at my desk, typing the last report for the file, and couldn't help but prod, satisfied. Kramer'll dig out the hard evidence, maybe a confession, maybe receipts for almond extract, but pinning it on that flinch, risky if she'd held her nerve. Phooey, Wolfe grunted, eyes half-lidded, but sharp. The flinch was confirmation, not foundation. Her access unimpeded at Edward's home, noted by Mrs. Delaney on the day of the tart, was primary. Motive, inferred from Miss Voss's reticence on accounts Clara likely skewed, was secondary. Opportunity. Proximity to my own domain during visits cemented it. Her scent, lavender, lingered in memory near the pantry incident, a detail I withheld until decisive. Risk was minimal. I am content. I grinned, despite myself. That's Wolfe, every angle covered, even if he plays it close until the curtain falls. I finished typing, then leaned back. Edward's a wreck. Think he'll recover, knowing his sister wanted him dead? His recovery is not my concern. Wolfe said, dismissive. He is alive. The threat neutralized. My fee will be rendered. That suffices. He paused, then added, softer. Though betrayal of kin cuts deep, he may seek solace elsewhere, not here. That was as close to empathy as Wolfe gets, and I let it lie. The phone jangled, then saw Panzer. With a final update, Archie, nothing new at Henshaw's places. Quiet all night, no lurkers. Kramer's got men poking around Clara's apartment now. Heard they found some doctored ledgers already, and a half-empty vial of almond extract in a drawer. Looks like Wolfe nailed it. I'm wrapping up unless you need me. Thanks, Saul, I said. Stand down. Bail's on us. I relayed it to Wolfe, who merely nodded, a faint lip twitch signaling approval. Evidence tying Clara to the act was gravy. He'd already closed the book in his mind. By evening, Fritz had scrubbed the pantry top to bottom again, reassured. The spice jars were untouched beyond that one cinnamon incident, and locked the area tighter than a bank vault. The brownstone's sanctity felt restored, though I caught Fritz muttering about intruders as he prepped dinner. Wolfe ascended to the greenhouse for his orchid ritual, a clear sign he was washing his hands of the Henshaw mess. I stayed downstairs, finishing paperwork, reflecting on how quiet betrayal can be. Clara's lavender masking venom, her care masking calculation. Edward's life was spared, but at a cost no fee could cover. The next morning brought a brief coda. A courier delivered a check from Edward Wolfe's substantial fee, plus a note of gratitude scrawled in a shaky hand. I owe you more than money. I'll never understand why, but I'm safe because of you. I showed it to Wolfe, who glanced at it, grunted, and waved it away. Deposit it, Archie. Sentiment is extraneous. The matter is concluded. I did, and that was that. The brownstone hummed back to normal. Fritz's kitchen clinks, Wolfe's orchid schedule, my own routines of mail and banter. But as I filed the case notes, I couldn't shake a lingering wariness. That spice jar incident, Clara's subtle trespass into our walls, was a reminder. Even fortresses have chinks. I double-checked the locks that night, just in case, and caught Wolfe watching me from the office doorway, a rare almost smirk on his face. Vigilance, Archie? He murmured. Unnecessary. No one challenges this domain twice and prevails. Maybe, I shot back, grinning, but I'd rather not smell lavender in the pantry again. He snorted closest thing to a laugh and retreated. The case was over, Clara's betrayal exposed, Edward's life secured, and the brownstone stood firm. Wolfe's reveal, built on logic as unyielding as these walls, had cut through deception like a knife through butter. True to his style, cerebral, implacable, with no wasted motion, I poured a glass of milk from Fritz's stash, raised it to nobody in particular, and toasted the end of a nasty little plot. Mysteries come and go, but this place, this fortress endures, and so do we.